3 continents. 0 contact. The exact same impossible solution. That's not a coincidence anyone has been able to explain. For over a century, people have looked at the biggest stone structures on Earth and asked the same question. How did they move something that heavy without machines? But that's the wrong question. The real question is stranger. Why did civilizations, who never met, who never traded, who didn't even know the others existed, solve the same problem the same way? Let's start with what you think you know. You've probably heard that ancient people built with primitive tools, ropes, wooden sledges, brute manpower. That's the textbook answer. It's also, in most cases, technically true. But technically true is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Because when you look closely at how these solutions were actually engineered, primitive starts to feel like the wrong word entirely. Take Stonehenge. For decades, the story was simple. Neolithic Britons dragged massive sarsen stones from somewhere nearby and the smaller blue stones from somewhere far away, nobody was sure where. Then in 2020, geologists finally traced the sarsens, the huge upright stones, to West Woods, about 15 miles from the site. Case closed, right? Not quite. Because the blue stones, the smaller ones, came from the Preseli Hills in Wales. That's roughly 150 miles away. Over land, and possibly water, using nothing but timber, rope, and human muscle, around 5,000 years ago. Here's where things get strange. 15 miles away, on the other side of the planet, in the Andes, the Inca were solving the exact same transport problem: heavy stone, brutal terrain, no wheels, no draft animals at Ollantaytambo. Stones from a quarry across a river and up a mountainside, some over 50 tons, moved without a single wheel ever touching them. Same problem. Same absence of the obvious tools. Same result. It got done anyway. Coincidence? Maybe. But it keeps happening. Go to Egypt, 4,500 years ago. The Great Pyramid of Giza is built from roughly 2.3 million blocks of stone. Some of the granite beams sealing the chambers inside weigh close to 80 tons. The whole structure is aligned to true north with an accuracy of a fraction of a degree, a level of precision that would be respectable with laser instruments, let alone copper chisels. No blueprints have ever been found. No description of the actual lifting method survives. Ramps, levers, sledges, all plausible, none proven. Now, go to Lebanon. Centuries later, Roman engineers built the Temple of Jupiter at Baalbek on a platform that includes 3 stones known as the Trilithon. Each one weighs around 800 tons. Nearby, still sitting in the quarry, unfinished, is a block nicknamed the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, estimated at close to 1,000 tons. And in 2014, archaeologists found an even larger block buried just beside it, believed to weigh somewhere around 1,650 tons. Nobody has fully explained how the Romans planned to move it. It's still in the ground. But here's the part that should stop you. Baalbek is Roman. Giza is Egyptian, 2,000 years older. Ollantaytambo is Inca, on a continent the Romans didn't know existed. Different centuries. Different tools, different gods, different languages, different everything. And yet the fingerprint of the engineering massive stone, moved farther than seems reasonable, positioned with more precision than seems necessary, shows up again, and again, and again. This is where most videos stop and reach for aliens, or a lost global civilization, or Atlantis. Don't do that yet, because the real evidence, the evidence that's actually been tested, tells a more interesting story than that. Go to Cusco, Peru. The Inca fortress of Sacsayhuamán is built from stones so precisely cut that some blocks are estimated to weigh well over 100 tons, fitted together with no mortar at all, and the joints are so tight you can't slide a blade between them. Those walls have survived earthquakes that leveled Spanish colonial buildings standing right next to them. The flexible, interlocking joints absorb the shaking. The rigid European stonework didn't. That's not decoration. That's earthquake engineering, built by people with no written language, no iron tools, and no wheel. Now here's the contrast flip. Everyone accepts that primitive means simple, but the physical evidence at Sacsayhuamán says something completely different. It says whoever built this understood seismic stress well enough to design around it, centuries before anyone had a word for seismology. Keep going. Rapa Nui, Easter Island. For decades, people assumed the moai statues, some standing close to 10 meters tall, had to have been dragged flat on sledges by enormous teams of workers. Then, in 2012, researchers Carl Lipo and Terry Hunt tried something different. They rigged ropes to a replica statue and rocked it side to side, walking it upright, the same way you'd walk a heavy refrigerator. It worked. A team of 18 people moved it in a matter of minutes. The Rapa Nui oral tradition had said the statues walked to their platforms the whole time. Researchers had spent decades assuming the story was a myth. It wasn't a myth. It was a technical manual nobody had bothered to test. This is the deeper mystery. Not that ancient people were secretly hiding lost super technology, but that we keep underestimating what careful observation, patient experimentation, and generational knowledge could actually achieve, and we keep getting proven wrong. Most people never question this part, but the pattern gets even stranger when you look at scale instead of weight. At Karnak, in Egypt, the Great Hypostyle Hall holds 134 massive stone columns, some rising more than 20 meters, each one carved from stacked blocks with detailed reliefs running the full height. It wasn't built in one reign. It was expanded over centuries by successive pharaohs adding to a structure none of them would live to see finished. That's not just an engineering problem. It's a planning problem that spans human lifetimes. Somebody had to trust that the project would still make sense to whoever inherited it. Compare that to the Longyou Caves in Zhejiang province, China discovered by accident in 1992, when villagers pumped water out of what they'd assumed for generations was just a deep, unremarkable pond. Underneath was a network of enormous carved chambers, with smooth walls, evenly spaced support pillars, and consistent tool marks running across every surface in the same rhythmic pattern. Multiple caves, carved to what appears to be a single, shared design. No historical text mentions who carved them, when, or why. No local legend explains it either. Whoever organized a labor force large enough to remove that much rock left no name behind at all. History tells us one thing, that a project on this scale should leave a paper trail, an inscription, a king's name carved somewhere prominent. The evidence at Longyou tells us another. Sometimes the biggest projects are the ones that vanish from the record completely. But not every claim survives that kind of testing. And this next part matters, because it shows you what happens when the story runs ahead of the evidence. In October 2023, a team led by Indonesian geologist Danny Hilman Natuijaja published a paper about Gunung Padang, a stepped stone site in West Java. Using ground-penetrating radar and radiocarbon dating, they claimed to have found buried structures dating back as far as 27,000 years, which would make it older than the pyramids of Egypt by tens of thousands of years. Older, in fact, than most estimates for the birth of settled civilization itself. It went everywhere. Headlines called it the world's oldest pyramid. It seemed to confirm exactly what a lot of people wanted to believe, that somewhere out there was proof of an advanced civilization erased from history. Then archaeologists actually checked the dating. The radiocarbon samples hadn't come from anything clearly linked to human activity. No tools, no cut marks, no artifacts, just soil, dated in isolation. One critic put it simply, it was like drilling a core sample under a modern building and dating the dirt underneath it, then claiming the building itself was that old. Within 5 months, the journal Archaeological Prospection retracted the paper entirely. Not because Gunung Padang isn't real, it is, and most estimates still place meaningful activity there at around 6,000 years old, which is already remarkable. But because the sensational part of the claim, the part that made it go viral, didn't hold up. This changes everything about how you should read the rest of this video. Because it proves 2 things at once. First, extraordinary claims about lost advanced civilizations get checked, and when they're wrong, they get corrected. The system works, even slowly, even after the damage is done. And second, the sites that didn't need a sensational claim to be astonishing, Baalbek, Giza, Sacsayhuamán, Stonehenge, Rapa Nui, are still standing there, unexplained in the details, without anyone needing to bend the evidence to make them impressive. The mystery was never that history is hiding a secret advanced civilization. The mystery is quieter than that, and somehow bigger. It's this. Isolated human groups, with no contact and no shared blueprint, kept independently arriving at engineering solutions that took modern experts decades to even test, let alone fully explain. Precision transport across oceans of land. Joints that outlast earthquakes. Statues that walk. Alignments accurate to a fraction of a degree, carved with hand tools. Nobody handed them the answer. They found it themselves, over and over, on opposite sides of the planet, without knowing anyone else was solving the same problem. There's one more site worth mentioning, because it shows the pattern working in the opposite direction. Not stone moved across a continent, but water moved across a desert. At Palmyra and across the ancient Near East, engineers built Karnak's underground channels that carried groundwater for miles through arid terrain, sloped with such precision that water flowed by gravity alone, losing almost none of it to evaporation along the way. Some of those channels are still functioning today, more than 2,000 years after they were dug, entirely by hand, with vertical shafts sunk at intervals to remove the excavated earth. No modern surveying equipment, no lasers, no LiDAR, no satellite elevation data. Just people who understood gradient over miles of invisible underground distance well enough to get it right the first time because there was no way to fix it after the fact. That's the detail that changes how you should think about all of this. It's not that these builders had secret tools we haven't found yet. It's that they had time, patience, and an intimacy with material stone, water, gravity, that a species surrounded by machines has largely lost. We didn't get smarter than them. We got faster. Those aren't the same thing. And that's the honest, careful answer, even if it's less exciting than a lost civilization. The mystery isn't a conspiracy. It's a capability gap between what a well-organized, patient civilization could achieve by hand and what we assume is possible without engines. So the next time someone tells you an ancient structure shouldn't have been possible, ask a different question. Not how did they do it without technology. Ask what they understood about stone, about weight, about the ground shaking beneath their feet, that took us until the 21st century to even begin testing. Maybe the real story was never about what they lacked. Maybe it's about what they saw, that we're only now learning how to look for.